Hello, today is Wednesday, April 20th, 2022. My name is Matthew Asaro, and I'm going to be interviewing Owsbaldo Ibarra for the South Texas Archives at Texas A&M University, Kingsville. This is part of the Voces of a Pandemic Oral History Project in partnership with the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Please know, Mr. Ibarra, that this recorded interview will be placed in South Texas Archives at Texas A&M University, Kingsville, and shared with the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. If there is anything you do not wish to answer or talk about, especially given that your recording may appear online, I will honor your wishes. Also, if there is something you want to talk about, please bring it up and we'll talk about it. Because we are not conducting this interview in person, I need to record you consenting. So I'll ask a series of 6 questions. Please say, yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree after each one. There are 4 questions we need to make sure you agree to before we go on. South Texas Archives at Texas A&M University, Kingsville wishes to archive your interview along with any other photographs and other documentation at the South Texas Archives at Texas A&M University, Kingsville. We will retain copyright of the interview and any other materials you donate to the South Texas Archives at Texas A&M University, Kingsville. All right. Do you give us consent to archive your interview and your materials at the Jernigan Library at Texas A&M University, Kingsville?
Yes, I agree.
All right. Do you grant South Texas Archives at the Jernigan Library at Texas A&M University, Kingsville copyright over the interview and any material you provide?
Yes, I agree.
Do you agree to allow South Texas Archives at the Jernigan Library at Texas A&M University, Kingsville to post this interview on the internet where it may be viewed by people around the world?
Yes, I agree.
And do you grant South Texas Archives at Jernigan Library at Texas A&M University, Kingsville consent to share your interview and materials with the Voices of a Pandemic Oral History Center at the University of Texas, Austin for inclusion in the Voices of a Pandemic Oral History Project, which will include posting the interview on the internet?
Yes, I agree.
Okay. We have many questions in a pre-interview form that we've already filled out. We use this information from the pre-interview form to help in research. This entire form is to be kept in a secure Voces server at the University of Texas at Austin. The final storing of the pre-interview form will be at the South Texas Archives at the Jernigan Library at Texas A&M University, Kingsville. We will have stripped out any contact information for yourself or your family members, so that will not be a part of your public file. Your public file will only be accessible at the Jernigan Library. Do you wish for us to share the rest of your interview in the public file available to researchers at the South Texas Archives at Jernigan Library at Texas A&M University, Kingsville? So you can answer whatever to this.
Yes, I agree.
On occasion, Voces receives requests from journalists who wish to contact our interview subjects. We only deal with legitimate news outlets. Do you give consent for us to share your phone numbers or your email with journalists?
Yes, I agree.
Alrighty. Okay, so that's the whole preamble out of the way. And just to let everybody know, I'm a little bit under the weather at the moment. If my voice sounds a little crackly or whatever, or if I need to sneeze or cough or whatever, I'm sorry about that. But anyways, so this is Owsbaldo Ibarra, and I'm going to be interviewing him about just his life and COVID and how this whole pandemic has affected him personally, or how he believes it's affected the world as a whole. Okay, so to start off, I guess just tell me a little bit about yourself.
So I'm currently a student at Texas A&M University in College Station. I'm currently a junior. I'm part of the class of 2024. I'm studying or I'm majoring in biomedical sciences on a pre-vet track. And while doing that, I'm also currently running a construction business or a masonry business.
All right, awesome. So when did you start going to school at College Station?
In 2020
All
in
right, so that was
August.
like, yeah, that was like right after the whole start of the pandemic and everything. You
Yeah.
graduated right when it was starting. Um, go ahead and tell me about your first experience with hearing about COVID. Like, how did that affect you? How what was your reaction to hearing about it?
I mean, whenever I first heard about COVID, I honestly thought it was just like a joke that they were posting on the internet, uh, because I mean there hasn't really been any like major pandemics. I mean, we've heard about Ebola and other illnesses like spreading and possibly getting into the United States. We hadn't really heard, at least in our generation, of any real potentially dangerous illness. And so whenever I first heard about it, I thought it was a joke. And I would go on the John Hopkins website every day and look at the amount of cases just to get like an idea of like how serious this thing was. And I mean, with every day that I'd look at it, it just seemed like it was getting worse and worse with no like end in sight, honestly.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, I definitely remember the first time hearing about it, and it was just like, I mean, nobody really knew what to think about it. There was just a whole bunch of different reactions to it. Um, so you said at first you thought it was a joke, and then it began to get a whole lot more serious, obviously as it started to progress and everything. Were you ever like super concerned about it, super worried? Was there anything that started to scare you? Do you remember like the exact point or month, I guess not like the exact date, but that like breaking point where you start to notice like, oh dang, this is like not just another fluke.
I mean, to me, it got serious whenever uh, at the end of spring break in high school for us, because that same week is whenever I mean everything just changed. Is whenever like we officially went. They told us don't come back to school right now. Uh, it's a current emergency, and we all just can't come back right now. And I mean, after that, I mean, at first, most of us thought we were just gonna go back. It was just be a couple weeks, and nobody really thought it was just gonna all come to an end like that. And I mean, it kind of got serious for me personally, because a lot of people close to our family started hearing like of family members getting sick or like people ending up in the hospital, and that's when it got serious to me, because most of those people that were ending up in the hospital were people that had chronic illnesses like diabetes, which my mom has, and as well as my grandma who has also high blood pressure and diabetes. So it got serious to me whenever all I started hearing about was the people that were dying were obviously those individuals.
Yeah. Not to take away from you or anything, but my mom also was struggling with like some illnesses and stuff. And I was always kind of worried about her, but she always seemed to not really care quite as much, at least right at the beginning. Um, and she was more like outgoing still. She was still trying to just not really let the pandemic affect her life. She was trying to just maintain that control on her life. Do you feel like your parents or your mom had that kind of same outlook, or were they taking it seriously? How did they react to it?
So both of my parents took it a very different way. Obviously, my dad took it at a more relaxed pace because he's the one who works to provide for our family. Because my mom's stays at home and she's just takes care of the house. Uh, so my dad just took it a little bit more relaxed. Relaxed, like he take care of himself, but he'd still go to like gatherings and not social distance as much and not take as much as many precautions as my mom would take. My mom would try and go to the store whenever she knew like there was the least amount of people and try to avoid being close to people when she was in the store. Uh, and she'd always have her hand sanitizer on her, all her mask. I mean, she basically would disinfect anything that came into the house from the store, like any bottles, any packaging. She'd always like wipe off and put on like gloves and wipe off with like disinfecting wipes to make sure that there wasn't like anything on there we could contract the virus from touch. Since we know that if you get it like on your hands and then rub it on your eyes or come near your nose, that's a way that it can be transmitted.
Hmm. Uh, yeah, so it's good to hear that your mom was careful about it, considering just her health condition and everything. Just because I know how scary that can be, having family members with those kinds of illnesses. Um, I was gonna ask you, uh, how did it personally make you feel whenever, like, of course, you knew that your mom had this diabetes, I think you said, and it's just she's a lot more at risk for not just catching COVID, but for having more serious ailments and more serious just symptoms and side effects. And, she's one of the ones that's really at risk for it. How did that make you feel emotionally, mentally?
So at first, I really didn't think much about it because it was just like majority of people think it's just something that happens to other people. Uh, it probably won't happen to me. And I mean, it didn't really get real, at least to me, until she actually got COVID. Because at that point, at first, we all thought it was just like something small because it was like so early in the pandemic. We're like, it can't be that because there's like barely any cases. We don't even go out. So it's probably like just a cold or something. Um, so we didn't think much of it whenever she started showing symptoms. But then within like 2 3 days, we started to notice that she was like starting to breathe. She was having like massive headaches, and that's when we knew that we had to take her to the hospital. Uh, and whenever we took her, they admitted her, told her, "You're only gonna stay for a day. We're just gonna give you some like the normal care, I guess, to treat like the pneumonia because she was already starting to develop pneumonia as well. Uh, but as like the time went on during that day, she started getting worse, and they told her, "You're gonna have to stay here for a couple of days." And she was on the, at least from what the doctors told us, she was on the verge of going onto a ventilator because of how bad her breathing was getting. But thankfully, she started getting the antibody treatment, which was one of the reasons why she feels she got better personally. Because after she got that treatment, she felt like her symptoms started to get relieved, and whenever she got back home, honestly, it kind of hit me pretty hard, and it put me like in a rough spot because she was the woman who I watched growing up be like one of the strongest women. She was beaten down so badly to where she had lost so much weight and her face just looked so sunken in. She could barely stand without anybody like trying to hold her up. And she had to walk around with the tubing for the oxygen because she still needed constant oxygen on with her because without it she felt like she was out of breath constantly. Like if she take it off, even if she was like laying down, she felt like she was running out of breath. Um, and during that time, it also got hit me harder because my dad got sick as well, and so I got sick as well, obviously. But my two younger brothers thankfully didn't get it, and so because I was the one with the least worst symptoms, I was the one who was taking care of everybody else and making sure that my brothers obviously didn't get sick and they got all could we quarantine them in their room to make sure that they didn't come into contact with us. And I made sure to get them all their food, get them what they needed basically. And my dad was struggling with the massive headaches that he was getting, where he couldn't even really stand out of bed. And so I tried calling my mom, and she couldn't even talk for like 10 seconds without already feeling like she was running out of breath, even though she had her oxygen on in the hospital. And then, I mean, it was just a lot. And whenever she got out of the hospital, all I could see on my news feed, on social media, everything was just stories about these kids losing both of their parents to COVID. And at first, much like what I thought about COVID was just like, oh, it's just some stuff that happens to everybody else. But as you start seeing more of it, it starts affecting you more, thinking that that could be a possibility for you. and so that honestly put me in a pretty bad spot emotionally and mentally. Just thinking about all the going through my head all the possibilities of what could happen if like she instead of getting better, she actually started getting worse after she went out of the hospital.
Yeah, no, that's extremely hard to deal with, and I feel for you. I'm sorry about all that. Um, yeah, it's not something that anyone should have to go through, and it's so crazy as you're talking about how quickly it developed and how much it went from just this normal thing that we thought was just gonna like fly by and just be like another Ebola scare like you were talking about, but it ended up literally changing the entire trajectory of our lives, and some more than others, obviously. Like in your case, it really affected you and your family, and that's just something I really feel for, and that's very sad that that all happened. Um, and with all of that, I'm sure that it also affected like your schoolwork, your work, whatever you were doing at the time. How did that all, COVID itself, and then combined with the mental and emotional struggles that you were going through, how did that affect you graduating, you getting into college, like you starting this new chapter of your life?
So I mean, thankfully it was during a period um where there really wasn't much going on because I got it a couple like a month and a half before came here to Texas A&M. Um, but during that time period, there wasn't really much going on. Uh, I was starting the masonry business. We got a really nice job that would pay some bills, and it was a struggle because when we were about to finish that job is when we got sick, and we're the mode of transportation for our workers. So we ended up being a little bit behind on that job, and then our workers obviously went to go work with somebody else while we were getting better. So I mean, it not only affected me, but it affected those other people's families. Um, but emotionally, it didn't really it affected me a little bit in the beginning, but it really didn't affect me until I came here because coupled with everything that happened during that time period when she had COVID and then following up with her recovery, making sure that she was okay. Uh, you get thrown into coming here, being the first time that you're away from your family, being the first time you're really responsible for yourself. That's something obviously that I was going through, trying to figure out. And then apart from that, I was constantly worried that whether or not my mom was okay because she was still recovering. She was better, obviously. She was off the oxygen and everything, but she still felt like she'd sometimes run out of breath. And I mean, that was normal, obviously, because of the effect it had on her lungs. But after everything you see with people that had COVID, after all the stories, you start imagining stuff that obviously uh, is very low possibility at most times, but it's very hard to not try and imagine those situations when you're so far away and the only mode of contact is with a phone, where obviously your parents are trying to take care of you, uh, make sure they're doing the best for you. So they're gonna at times lie to you just so that they make sure that you're okay. And knowing that, it sometimes made me think, is she actually being serious with me or is she just saying this so that I don't worry? So I mean, going through all that, thankfully classes were online. So I came here for a week and I wasn't really doing good mentally. And so I just went back, try to figure out my whole situation, what I could do to better my mental health. Uh, I mean, just try to figure out my whole situation and what I really wanted to do. Because after all that happened, it really switched around my plans and really made me think about what I really wanted to do with my life and my future.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, we actually graduated in the same class, so I know that we both kind of we're entering that next stage, that college stage together. And just from my personal experience, and from everybody's, I can assume like that's a big step in life, and it's a big, like you were talking about, like just a whole lot more responsibilities, being responsible for yourself, relying on only yourself, having to just learn how to live by yourself is an entirely different ball game. And going through all that while having to deal with COVID, while having to deal with your parents going through that, while having to all of that stress on your mind, I'm sure it was, not the easiest time of your life. It had to be very difficult, very uh, straining on you. And academically, do you feel like it affected you at all? And how I guess I should ask you, how were your academics in high school, and were the was that course that you were on, was your work ethic, was anything like, were your grades affected at all by all of this stuff going on?
So in high school, I got straight A's. I really never like struggled in any of my classes. Uh, and I honestly wouldn't really study. It's just something that majority of the stuff came naturally to me. And whenever I came into college, obviously you'd expect it to be much different. Uh, for those people that usually get straight A's and then they get that bad grade, it really discourages them. And that is what honestly happened to me in the beginning, um, because apart from not really being focused from everything that was going on, I was like, because on my first test for chemistry, I got I believe it was a 56. And that's something that I was never used to because in high school, all I got was straight A's on all my tests. But here I come here and I get a 56 on my very first exam. And that coupled with everything that was going on in my life, it really put me down and made me really rethink of how I was taking it all in. And after that 56, it really opened my eyes and made me realize that I had to do something to change my mentality and change what I was really focusing on and what was really going on. Um, because after that 56, I honestly began talking to more people about what I was really going through. And I managed to, after that, just go back to what I was used to, getting good grades. And thankfully, even though I got that really bad grade, I managed to save my overall grade and came out with that semester with a 4.0. Uh, but overall, I feel like it did affect me academically, uh, just because it's a lot of distractions going on at the same time, and you can't really, although you try to focus as much as you can on school, sometimes it just overwhelms you.
Yeah, I totally understand that. Um, so you were also talking about online classes and how you were grateful that most classes were online at the beginning of the pandemic, like 2020, 2021, early 2021. Um, what do you think about online classes and the way in which your campus went about that? Was it any different? I mean, of course it was different than like high school, but how did that difference and how did that change like the way that you learned and the way that you studied? Did you have to start studying more, studying harder? Because you said in high school you never really had to study. Is that a different scenario now, or what's your opinion on that?
Honestly, with online classes, I feel like to me personally, uh, it was the same. I really didn't see like a difference in in-person learning and online learning, other than obviously to me online learning was better because the lectures were recorded. So anything that I might have missed during class, or if I maybe didn't write down like a certain explanation as to why something occurred, I could just go back to the video for the lecture and rewatch it and find out what I really missed. So to me personally, online classes were better, and they they just made me study obviously the same, but I had more. tools to better understand the information than just going off my notes or certain aspects of the book.
All right, I understand that. Um, okay, so we talked about online classes. Was there anything else that your college did in particular to cater to students during this pandemic? Were there any, just any actions that they took that helped you guys or that helped to at least like kind of curb the virus and just kind of get things under control? What was your school's actions like in that case?
So my school was more of, if you want to protect yourself, protect yourself, and if you don't, then that's up to you. Uh, Obviously, masks were enforced during the beginning, like in most places. But the one thing that I really liked that they did was the forced testing at the beginning of each semester, because it really gave you an idea of what the case amount was on campus, and it really let you know if the virus was really active on campus, to know whether or not you should really take into consideration of how careful to be around people, because a lot of people, although they got a positive test, they still come to class because they don't want to miss lectures. Um, but obviously, that was during the beginning of the pandemic. I mean, after we came back, because in the beginning of pandemic, obviously, majority of the classes were online. Nobody was really having anything in person, so the cases were low because there just wasn't that many people. But once we came back and you saw the test, you could tell that there was a very serious large number of people that were going still to class and were testing positive. So it really, although that was being enforced, it honestly added to the amount of worry about, could I get COVID again and take it back home, because I go back home every week to manage the business and just go hang out with my family. So it really worried, at least me personally, uh, about the potential to take back the virus with such a large amount of cases.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about the COVID testing actually, because my campus does that as well. Before we check into dorms every semester. Uh, so you do feel like that made quite a big difference on how people looked at it and just like, how safe you felt returning. Um, and that was something else I was gonna ask. Whenever you would travel back home or uh, travel back home from college, were you ever really worried? Did you ever try to get COVID tested? Was it just like one of those things you had to like quarantine, or were you just like careful, making sure that you weren't showing any symptoms, making sure that you weren't sick before you went back around your family? Because I know obviously you wouldn't want like your mom or anybody else to get sick again uh,
Yeah.
from stuff like that.
So I I wouldn't try to get a COVID test just because during that time they weren't in a lot of places. Obviously, campuses, majority of them offer for them for free, but I'd always, because I'm very forgetful, so I'd always forget to set up an appointment to get a COVID test. So I just try to make sure that I was the most safe and just didn't show any symptoms. Um, but when I did show symptoms, uh, it honestly brought up a lot of flashbacks back uh, from that very first time that my mom got sick. And so honestly, every time I show any sort of symptom, I start freaking out and I go in quarantine in my room, make sure that I never touched anything that they could come into contact with, never be anywhere near where they might place something for me to get it so I could eat or something. Um, I just try to be the most careful whenever I did show some potential symptoms. Uh, Especially the second time around that I did get COVID again, I was trying to be the most careful. Although it seemed like the second time it was much more mild, as expected because I got vaccinated. So it just felt like, I don't know how to explain it, but I just felt as if I did everything I could the amount of risk should be very low.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. So the risk was low. You always made sure that you took every, um, yeah, now I'm forgetting the word. Took
Every
every
precaution.
action to make sure that you were just safe, you know. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, so I was also going to ask, well, obviously you and your family and probably like your closest friends would take care of these things, wear masks, get vaccinated, take frequent COVID tests, just be safe, be considerate of other people. Did you notice any like political, religious, ideological differences or disagreements on campus or in the world in general that have like just made things unsafe or what's your stance on politics and having to do with COVID and do you think that that should have any place to do with our safety or is it just and have you had any experiences that have made you feel uncomfortable or made you feel like I guess in danger of the virus just due to people's religious or political beliefs?
So based on political beliefs, I feel like a lot of the situations in terms of the lockdowns or like certain laws, uh, I feel like here they were relaxed too early, and that's why we saw a very like large amount of case amounts, a very large amount of like a rapid rise in cases right after the lockdown was because we came out too early and um just I feel like the government didn't really look at the data appropriately and they just wanted to open up because that's what people wanted. But during a public health emergency, I feel like it's the data that should talk, not the people. Because although the majority of the people might not get sick fully, it's still a very large amount of the population that has a large amount of chronic diseases that is still affected. And those people, I feel like it should be the overall amount of good for the whole community, not just for a certain amount of individuals. So just because of some individuals want that freedom, it's better to keep the whole community safe than just give those certain amount of individuals what they want. Uh, because like here on campus, it was I feel like during this second year, at the beginning, we should have at least been given the option of some online classes instead of it being fully in person, just because of the large amount of cases that there was at the beginning of the semester. Um, because obviously those of us, there was people that wanted to come back. They wanted to have that whole college experience. They wanted to give back some something normal based upon like how it was before. But I personally feel like I wanted to stay online to keep my family safe because it was a less amount of risk associated with being here and going back every week compared to staying over there and really having any contact with potential ways of getting COVID.
Yeah, that's actually exactly where I was going with this. So with the mask mandates, with vaccines rolling out, with everything, with the state of the world as it is right now, with just other serious events going on, like between Russia and Ukraine, and really since that kind of stuff has kicked off at the beginning of 2022, I guess, me personally, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, it's just felt like COVID has just lost a bunch of like attention. Like
Mm-hmm.
nobody really thinks about it near as much as they used to. Even 3 or 4 months ago, it felt like it was still such a big deal because I remember I was still concerned about getting my second dosage of the vaccine just not even like 5 months ago, maybe. And now it feels like COVID's just kind of been wiped off the face of the earth, and you don't see it in the news anymore. You don't see it on YouTube or on headlines. Um, and I was just going to ask you about that. Like, what do you think about that? Have you noticed that as well? And do you think that COVID is still like as serious or as threatening, or is it become starting to become under control, or is it something that we should still like take these precautions with? Should we still be wearing masks? Should we still be, you know, taking as much precaution as we were before? What's your stance on that?
So I still am personally still safe. I still wear my mask. I make sure that clean my hands properly, just make sure that I'm clean overall. Uh, but I do feel like COVID has lost a lot of, I wouldn't say momentum, but a lot of publicity. Just because you don't, like you say, you don't really hear about it in the news. Um, but I do feel like it will make its comeback just because of how many variants of this virus there are and how high of a mutation rate it has. There's just a lot of potential behind it that maybe what we saw with the Delta variant is really nothing compared to what it could really do. But I mean, potentially it could also be because of just the medical innovations that have occurred since the start of the pandemic that has allowed us to control the virus and better treat it. So maybe that's why it's also lost publicity, just because we've managed to get a better control of it, managed to take better care of patients, decrease like the loads on hospitals. I mean, just decrease the overall issue behind it.
Yeah, yeah, the risk has definitely seemed to decline a little bit, and it's just like it's understandable seeing how people are trying to move on and want to go back to normality. Like you were saying, the students at the beginning of this school year, how you preferred online, and there were so many students wanting to go back to having the college experience, like being able to party, being able to go to classes, go to football games. I know that that's a big thing, especially in your campus, and it's just like seems like people are trying a little too hard to go back to normality at the sake, uh, or I mean, I guess at the cost of their safety and of other safeties. And since the beginning of the pandemic, it really hasn't affected people like you and I, healthy, like middle-aged, young individuals. It's really been
Mhm.
like either extremely young or extremely old, or, the vulnerable with weak immune systems. So, um, and I guess that kind of leads me into my next point. So since we kind of do have that privilege of just being the age that we are, having our being in good health and doing this kind of stuff, do you think that we have more of a responsibility on learning how to like control and kind of curb stomp this thing? Or do you think that everybody should be held responsible and that, it's just kind of like everybody's in this together? Or what's your stance on that?
I mean, I feel like everybody should do their part to make sure that uh, we decrease the spread, just decrease the amount of potential it has. Because I mean, just it's basic science that uh, the more people that this virus infects, the more possibilities it has to mutate further and potentially become even more dangerous or even more uh, being able to having a higher rate of contamination between individuals. So I feel like it's everybody's part, but I personally feel like in our age group, it's we're the most responsible in terms of stopping the spread because we're the ones that are most likely to be out uh, at parties, at clubs, at bars. Um, our age is just typically the ones that are more out in social gatherings. So we're the ones who are most likely to be the ones that bring it home. We're just the ones that are most likely to be the cause of spread between our families to people in the store, just anybody in general, because we're the ones that are more around people.
Yeah, and then I was gonna ask, do you think that we are doing that, like as a whole, our generation? Do you think that we're being productive? Do you think we're doing a majority of the right things? Like, of course, there's gonna be outliers. There's gonna be people who don't care and don't, you know, there's gonna be those people. But do you think that as a whole, we're doing an all right job? How do you look at our generation in that case?
I mean, I feel like it's in between. There's people that care and there's people that don't really care. Um, and I feel like obviously it's people's decisions whether or not they want to be safe, whether or not they want to take care of their families. But I personally, after going everything through what I've gone through, I feel like I wouldn't want to see anybody else go through that similar situation where they see their family members that sick that they really can't really focus on what they're supposed to be focusing on. Um, and I just personally feel that our generation is in between, that there's people that do care, don't care. But I feel like majority of us really should care because a lot of our parents are still young, but a lot of them do have chronic illnesses that could really take a toll on them if they get COVID.
Okay, yeah, it's a very valid stance on that. Um, I'm gonna backtrack a little bit and just go back to more towards the beginning of COVID for a little while and talk about when it happened and where you were and how did it affect your senior year as you were graduating? Do you feel like it really like robbed you? Do you feel robbed? Do you feel like it's, I guess, unfair in a way? I don't know if that's the best word to use to describe it, but how do you feel it affected your whole senior year and all these special events that we were supposed to have planned and all these special things? It was a big part of your life. Like how did that affect you?
So I was never really much of the person that would get into the school events. I mainly would focus on events that had to do with soccer, just because I was always friends with the people on the soccer team, uh, uh, and I really enjoyed watching and playing soccer. So that's one of the things that it did personally rob me of, was watching my friends go to their final playoff matches, because just right before the final or the first announcement for us to not come back to school because of COVID was right when they finished their regular season, which is about to hit the playoffs. So I feel like it robbed me of that last chance to see my friends, because the majority of them either went to the military or just went to chase after their dreams of becoming professional soccer players to other states or other countries. And it robbed us of that last opportunity to really see the potential that the team had.
Okay, and then what about like graduation and that kind of stuff? Like how did graduation go down? Did you get a graduation? What was that case?
So our graduation, we still had a graduation, but I feel like it was very limited because after graduation, where majority of people take photos with their friends or their family members, right after we got out of the stadium, they just told us go home. You really can't take pictures out here in the parking lot. They were telling us just get into our cars and leave. So I feel like it robbed us at that last opportunity where we could take final pictures with some of the people that we haven't even seen since that moment in time. So it really robbed us of that final goodbye to some people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very valid uh point to bring and thing to bring up because of course every age group, every person was affected uniquely and differently by this pandemic, and I don't believe any of us have really had it fair or unfair. It's just an unfortunate series of events that have gone down. And it's just like, you know, I feel like everybody needs a chance to express their voice and their side of the story and their side. I feel like we all need to be in a even understanding here. All right. And also back towards the beginning of the pandemic, did you feel any sort of like motivation drop? And I know that that's kind of silly to ask, I guess, because obviously you weren't in the best place mentally or emotionally then, and there was a lot going on. But in terms of motivation for your future and for what you were going to do, did any of your plans change? Were there any like days where you just felt like it was impossible to get up and keep going to class and keep getting these straight A's that you've been getting your entire life?
I mean, yeah, during those first couple of weeks of classes, I felt like my motivation was very low. And I was honestly thinking about whether or not I should be going for the pre-vet track, because I wasn't really sure if that's what I really wanted to do after all those events. It just starts making you think of, is this really what I want to do for the rest of my life? Because just it makes you think of those type of questions where you see your life just change dramatically. Uh, makes you wonder, am I making the right decisions? Um, so, and like I said, I got that 56, and it was obviously because of lack of motivation, lack of focusing in class, lack of looking at notes, lack of doing homework, and looking at practice problems. Because in that general chemistry class, it was all math, which is one of the subjects that I'm the best at. But on this test, obviously, I didn't do all too well because I never really focused or was motivated to get those good grades. But after I got that grade, it was like, what am I doing? I gotta get back to what I'm used to, get back to what I know I can do, what I know I can achieve, because this isn't the end. This is only be the beginning of what I can do.
Yeah, it's very good. It's very good that you were able to overcome those things. And I was also going to ask you, what kinds of things did you do to cope in order to get to that place? What kind of, were there any specific people that you would talk to? Were there any influences? Was there anything that you would do just in your free time or whatever that would help you to rekindle that motivation and just keep going and just keep pushing?
So personally, it was just mainly talking to my mom because I'm mainly close with my mom just because my dad's always at work. So he'd always get home late. So I wouldn't really have chances to talk to him or really have good conversations with him because he'd always get home and just fall asleep because he was so tired. And my mom was the one that I could always just call and just have a conversation with. Um, but what mainly like helped me get my motivation up and like helped me get through was just finding other stuff to do. Because I was at that age where I could finally do uh, get into the stock market. I decided to get into stocks, try to better understand the different trends, the different prices, what different types of things been in the stock market. And also, like I said, I started my masonry business. It was just trying to keep busy with different things to do. And to me, it was different ways of trying to make money because obviously it's a college student. You got to try to find a way to make money. If it's not through a job, through somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely true. Um, yeah, so there's definitely just this motivation that just comes out of just needing the need for money, like you're talking about, the need to thrive, the need to just do better. Um, yeah, and like you said, stocks and all these little things, whatever it is that helps you get back into it, it's something that makes you feel like you're doing something productive, and it's something that's
Yeah.
just, fun even. Um, I guess speaking of fun, was there anything like that COVID affected? I know you talked about soccer, not being able to see your friends at soccer games or do whatever or play at their last games. Was there any part that you were involved in? Do you like playing soccer? Or is there any other like recreational fun activities, hobbies that you like to do that were affected by COVID, or were there any that you started or picked up because of COVID?
I mean, for me, it was mainly just soccer because during that time period, also the national soccer teams were supposed to come play in Houston. And because of COVID, those games were canceled. And so it was just something else that got taken away from me that I wasn't able to enjoy because of COVID. And also because of COVID, our season got cut short where I played soccer outside of school in like just Sunday leagues. Our season got cut short. They told us we can't really play because of COVID. Uh, you're just gonna have to wait and see what happens with this whole situation.
Yeah. Yeah, so it really just about affected every part of your life, as you're saying, and it's just it's one of those things that's just indescribable how much it has changed, like just the course of everybody's lives. And like you were talking about, like this is the new normal. There's really not
Yeah.
anything else after this, and it's hard to see something else after this. And that was also something I was going to ask you. Do you ever see any of this stuff going away? Like, I guess just the new habits that we picked up of like being more cleanly, like our cleanliness standards have risen. We see hand sanitizer dispensers like everywhere now. We see all these, we still wear masks, a lot of us do, and it's just, do you ever see any of these like habits ever going away? Do you see us going back to a normal society like the way that it was before all of this, or is this the new normal?
I think that with time, just like any other disease, because of the medical innovations and different medicine that might come out, or different just forms of reducing the spread of it, I think we're gonna go back to some type of normal like before. Obviously, we might never notice it. It's just something natural that's gonna happen. It's not like one day we're just gonna wake up and say, "Oh, we're back to normal." I mean, it's just a process that we have to go through, get accustomed to just having gone through something as big as the pandemic. Uh, it takes some time to get rid of habits, just like it takes time to gain them. Uh, you just have to, I guess, wait it out. There's not really, like I said, there's not really a set time period. Like, okay, here are habits started, and now here's where we gotta end. It's just something that people got to get used to. Uh, I mean, just COVID has to go to the back of our minds eventually, because I mean, you just can't stay scared for the rest of your life, wondering, am I going to get COVID? That's just not, to me personally, not a proper way to live.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, okay, and then I guess really the overarching thing here is because Voces has so much to do with Hispanic heritage and with Hispanic voices and their experiences during the pandemic. Do you feel like your heritage and your culture, whatever it may be, like certain cultural aspects, certain things that Hispanic culture has allowed you to do for your entire life or has led you to do, has any of that affected the way that you've gone about COVID? Has it made it difficult the way that you interact with your family members and whoever? And how has being a Hispanic person uh, changed your impact?
So, because us Hispanics are very close to our families, like we're constantly seeing each other, we're constantly having big parties. Uh, it was a very difficult situation just because, like I said, it was something that you were known to constantly do and you were just used to. So it was a very hard like habit to break, to not want to, even though people were still having parties and everything, to not want to go and celebrate with them, because like I said, my mom got really sick. So it was a whole new danger that I developed, or not really developed, but got accustomed to feeling, I guess. Uh, because my friends were still having parties, my friends were hanging out, going to places. Uh, but here I was, just constantly worried that if I did go to them, what if I ended up getting COVID again and just spreading it again to my mom? So it really made me lose out on a lot of opportunities to, especially hang out with those friends that went to the military, because a lot of those friends that went to the military were the ones throwing those parties. So I really missed out on saying just goodbyes to them. But I mean, it's just a whole situation that, I mean, just COVID brought on. I can't really do much about it, but I mean, just hope for the best.
Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, so that's good to hear that everything. And I wanted to ask you, how is your mom doing now? How's the rest of your family doing? Is everything looking up as her condition,
So I mean,
remain
her
stable?
condition's almost as if she never had it. Honestly, obviously, it had some effects on her, like it had effects on me before I got COVID, I was finally getting my mild time to around 7 minutes. Uh, but after COVID, it's been very difficult just because of the effect it had on my lungs. I haven't really been able to fully get back to that potential that I was getting to because I was constantly getting my time down, and at least in my stamina, I was able to get run faster and everything. But just COVID really took all took all my work and just threw it away because I wasn't really able to get back to that potential, at least as of yet. Um, but I'm working towards it to trying to see if there's uh, some way to improve my conditions.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's very good to hear that. Although, of course, it has its lasting effects, and it's you know it's just something that we're gonna have to work towards and work towards getting that back. Who knows how long, but it's good to hear that everything's looking up and starting to improve, and that your situation's looking a little bit better. And I was also going to ask, how has school changed since then and to now? Have your grades been improving? Have you been struggling still, or are you on more of a level mindset now? Is it easier to just kind of go about life now, or what's your situation now at this state of the pandemic?
So it's a more, I'd say, relaxed situation. I still worry about contracting COVID or taking back home, but it's a more relaxed. My grades are for sure have improved. I may not be getting those complete all A's, but I'm getting. I mean, it's okay. It's a difficult class. You'd expect to be struggling, and I'm happy with the grade that I'm getting because compared to majority of the other students in that class, I'm doing pretty well. Um, but I feel like I've gotten back to at least some state of normal compared to pre-pandemic, and obviously there's still room for improvement. But I mean, it's just a slow process. You got to get used to. You just got to get back into the rhythm of it. Um, but it's just, I mean, I feel like it's getting back to normal fully. But like I said, it's just a process of for the whole community to really get back to normal.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's really good to hear, and it's good to hear that everything's kind of just leveling back out, and that everything's going okay now, and that your situation's just improved from what it was. All right. Well, honestly, that's all the questions I have for you. It was great talking to you today, and I was just going to ask you, end it off here by just asking, is there anything else that you'd like to share, anything else you'd like people to hear about your story, or anything that you'd like to say about the pandemic or life in general?
I mean, not really, other than life's always gonna hit you with something. Uh, might be something small, might be something big, but it affects everybody differently. Uh, but I mean, your life's built upon how you handle situations, um, because life's all about going through challenges and knowing how to get through them. And I mean, just that's just always the next step on to another step in life is just can you get through the situations, those problems during that certain age.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much for talking to me. Uh, hope you have a great rest of your day. Hope that everything keeps going well, and had a great interview with you.
Or you too.